Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
My name is Graham Whitlock, and I'm 35 years old. For the past decade, I've been building something meaningful in the transportation industry right here in Denver, Colorado. My brother Jameson and I started our family holding company from absolutely nothing. We were two guys in a small office, running on caffeine and ambition, working 18-hour days, and putting every single dollar back into the business. No vacations, no splurging, just grit. We focused on logistics solutions for mid-sized manufacturing companies across the Midwest. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it grew faster than either of us expected. By 2019, we were pulling in 7 figures annually. I remember sitting across from Jameson one morning at the office, both of us bleary-eyed, and he looked up from his laptop and said, "You realize this thing's legit now, right?" I just nodded and smiled. We didn't really celebrate. We just kept working. I met Talia at a networking event downtown, in one of those exposed brick co-working spaces full of tech startups and curated snack bars. She was 27, worked in marketing for a fast-growing app company, and had this infectious laugh that carried across the room. I noticed it before I even noticed her. We started talking near the kombucha tap, of all places. She teased me for drinking black coffee like some kind of cowboy, and I teased her for pretending to like turmeric smoothies. It was easy, natural. We dated for 2 years. Dinners in Lohi, ski trips to Breckenridge, long drives through the mountains. She moved in with me after 6 months, and by 2020, I proposed. I did it at Garden of the Gods, just as the sun was going down. She cried, said yes, and called her mom before we even got back to the car. The wedding was everything she wanted, a destination ceremony in Napa Valley with 200 guests. We rented out a vineyard, flew in a jazz quartet, even had custom cocktail menus. The reception alone cost more than most people make in a year. But I didn't mind. I was making good money, and more than that, I wanted her to be happy. What Talia didn't know, what nobody knew except Jameson and our attorney, was that I had structured everything very carefully, long before she and I even crossed paths. Back in 2017, 3 years before we met, I had set up a family trust, an LLC structure, on my father's advice. I remember him sitting across from me at his kitchen table, sipping a glass of scotch, and saying, "Son, hope for the best, but plan for the worst." So I did. The house in Cherry Hills Village, owned by the trust. The BMW X7 in the garage, trust. My municipal bonds, tech stocks, even the vintage Rolex my grandfather passed down to me, all held under the family entity. Clean, untouchable. The first 3 years of our marriage were genuinely good. I'm not going to rewrite history. Talia seemed happy. We took trips to Europe, Paris, Rome, Amsterdam. She drove the Mercedes C-Class I had given her as a wedding gift. Said it was the first time she felt like she'd made it. We hosted dinner parties at our 4-bedroom house. She knew I was successful, but I never flaunted the full extent of our assets. I wasn't one of those guys who needed to impress people with flashy watches or luxury vacations. I lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. Talia assumed we had maybe $500,000 in total assets. In truth, the number was closer to $3 million, and that was by design. By early 2024, our 4th year of marriage, things began to shift. At first, I brushed it off. She started coming home late from work more often than usual. Client dinners, she'd say, or team meetings ran long. Fair enough, she worked in marketing, and I knew the startup world never really slept. But then there were the little things. She got weird about her phone. Started taking calls in the other room with the door closed. She'd slam her laptop shut the moment I walked by, said it was just emails, but wouldn't let me near it. When I asked how her day went, her answers felt off, like she was reading from a script. Vague, disconnected. Conversations about the future disappeared. No more spontaneous mentions of having kids someday. No more Zillow tabs open on her screen with dream homes she used to send me links to. It was like someone had dimmed the light inside her, and she didn't want me to notice. Then came the call. It was 7 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday in March. I was just finishing my coffee when Jameson's name lit up on my phone. "Hey," I answered, yawning. "You're up early. We've got a problem," he said. His tone was flat. Serious. Dakota Plastics just pulled out. I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean, pulled out?" "They've been acquired. The new parent company does logistics in-house. The contract's terminated. Effective immediately. Dakota Plastics accounted for nearly 40% of our revenue." Jameson didn't need to say anything else. I hung up and just sat there in silence for a long time. Coffee cold in my hand. That day, Jameson and I met with our legal and financial teams. We ran the numbers 6 ways to Sunday, and the reality was clear. If we wanted to survive, we had to sell. By the end of the week, we'd struck a deal, 30% of our stake to a larger transportation firm. It kept us afloat and bought us time. It was the smart move, the right move, long term. But there was a cost. The new partners wanted control. Their management team. Their way of doing things. I wasn't fired, but I was out. I'd still own my percentage. I'd still receive distributions. But the company I had built from scratch, the one I had sacrificed a decade of my life for, would now run without me. That evening, I came home, sat down at the kitchen island, and told Talia everything. We lost Dakota, I said. Had to sell a stake to keep things going. I'm stepping back for now. The new firm wants their own people in charge. She blinked, barely reacting. So what does that mean? For us, it means I won't be running the day-to-day anymore. My income will dip for a bit, but we're fine. We've got savings. And honestly, the business might be worth more down the line. I paused, searching her face. I just wanted you to know. I figured we'd get through this together. Instead of the comfort or support I had hoped for that night, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Calculation. Cold, measured calculation. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and the woman I married had been replaced by someone entirely different. 3 days later, she dropped the bomb. I was in my home office reviewing financial statements. The door creaked open behind me, and Talia walked in like she had rehearsed every step. She sat down across from my desk without a word. No hesitation. No emotion. I want a divorce, Graham. I looked up from my laptop, certain I had misheard. What? This isn't working anymore, she said. Her voice was level. Robotic. I think we both know that. She crossed her arms and stared at me like she was negotiating a contract, not ending a marriage. I've already contacted a lawyer. I set down my reading glasses and leaned back slowly. Talia, where is this coming from? I know the business situation is stressful, but we can work through this. It's not about the business, she replied, but we both knew that was a lie. Her tone was too quick, too polished. I need something different. I need space to figure out what I want. Space. I repeated the word like it tasted foreign. I'm moving out this weekend. I found a place. And that's when everything snapped into focus. The late nights, the guarded texts, the phone calls behind closed doors, the emotional withdrawal. All of it. You're seeing someone. She didn't even blink. Didn't deny it. Didn't look guilty. Just met my gaze and said flatly, his name is Logan Reeve. He works at my company. We've been close for the past few months. Close, I echoed. My voice came out low, sharp. While you've been married to me. Graham, she said, her voice growing impatient. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I want this to be amicable. We can split everything 50-50ths. Sell the house. Divide the accounts. You'll be fine. I nearly laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. She had cheated on me, was walking out of our marriage for a coworker, and now she expected me to hand over half of everything I'd spent the last 10 years building. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that there was nothing to split. Legally speaking, almost nothing we owned was actually ours. I kept my tone even. I see, I said, folding my hands in front of me. And you've thought this through? Of course I have, she said coolly. Colorado is an equitable distribution state. I'm entitled to half of all marital assets, Talia said, standing up as if the matter was already settled. She smoothed her skirt with deliberate precision, like she'd just delivered a quarterly report instead of shattering a marriage. My lawyer says it should be straightforward, since we don't have kids. Your lawyer? I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling about the answer. David Rodriguez. He handles divorces for several people at my company. He says cases like ours usually settle within 60 days. I nodded slowly, letting the words hang in the air. Well, I suppose I should get my own attorney, then. That would probably be best. She paused at the doorway, her fingers briefly touching the frame. For what it's worth, Graham, I did love you once. And just like that, she was gone. I sat there in my office for a long time after that conversation. Not angry, not even sad, just calculating. The same way I approached a balance sheet or a strategic partnership. She had made her move. Now it was my turn. I picked up the phone and called Jameson. She wants a divorce, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Jesus, Graham. I'm sorry, man. What are you going to do? Nothing dramatic, I replied. I'm going to let her play her hand. What do you mean? She thinks she's entitled to half of everything. She has no idea what everything actually is. The prenup? We never signed one. I didn't need to. Jameson went quiet for a beat. Then, the trust structure. Exactly, I said. She's about to learn the difference between marital property and separate property the hard way. My next call was to Robert Mitchell, the estate attorney who helped me design the trust and LLC structure back in 2017. Robert had always been sharp, meticulous, a little cold, but in this case, that was a good thing. When I explained the situation, he didn't miss a beat. Let me guess, Robert said dryly. She assumes the house, cars, and investments are all marital assets. That would be correct. Well, they're not, he said. The house is owned by the trust, which you established in 2017, 3 years before you met her. The BMW is registered under the LLC. Your investment accounts are in the trust's name. Even that Rolex your grandfather left you. It's documented as an inheritance, held in trust. What about her car? The Mercedes is titled to you personally, he said, but it was purchased with your separate funds as a wedding gift. Technically, it remains your separate property, Robert said, his voice calm and precise. And joint accounts? I asked. What joint accounts? He replied with a slight chuckle. You never established any joint accounts. She had access to your personal checking account for household expenses, sure, with a debit card, but that account remained solely in your name. I smiled for the first time in days. Exactly. There was a brief pause. Then Robert asked, Graham, I have to ask, did you plan this? I planned for this possibility, I said. There's a difference. That weekend, I watched from my home office window as Talia loaded her things into Logan Reeves' Honda Accord. It was almost surreal. The woman who once spent hours picking out throw pillows and Instagramming wine nights in our kitchen was now stuffing garbage bags full of clothes and books like she was fleeing the scene of a crime. Logan looked exactly how I'd pictured him. Mid-30s, receding hairline, dressed in a department store suit that was trying way too hard to be business casual. He kept glancing at the house, fidgeting with his phone like he was afraid I might come storming out. I didn't. I just watched. Talia moved with robotic purpose, not a glance back at the house. She didn't even bring boxes, just bags. She left the house keys and the Mercedes key fob on the kitchen counter next to a note written in her neat, slanted handwriting. Graham, I hope we can handle this like adults. My attorney will be in touch with yours soon. Talia. I poured myself 2 fingers of Maker's Mark, sat in my silent kitchen, and toasted the emptiness. Phase 1 was complete. She had played exactly the hand I expected her to play. Now it was time to let the legal system do what it does best, enforce the law. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed. It was Robert Mitchell. I just got off the phone with David Rodriguez, he said. Your wife's attorney. Ex-wife. I corrected without missing a beat. Right, he said. Anyway, he's demanding financial disclosure. Wants bank statements, property deeds, investment summaries, the works. Says Mrs. Whitlock is requesting temporary spousal support during the proceedings. Temporary spousal support. I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Apparently, Robert continued dryly. She can't afford her share of the rent at Mr. Reeves' apartment. She's not working since leaving your house. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. What did you tell him? I asked Robert. That we'd be happy to provide full disclosure of all marital assets, he said calmly. I'm preparing the response now. How long until they realize? Oh, I'd say about 5 minutes after Rodriguez opens the file. Robert was right. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee. The caller ID read David Rodriguez. I picked up. Mr. Whitlock, he began, sounding noticeably tense. I think there's been some kind of mistake with the documentation your attorney provided. What kind of mistake? I asked, keeping my tone even. Well, he said, and I could hear Talia's voice in the background, loud, agitated. According to these records, you don't actually own any significant marital property. The house is held in a family trust established in 2017. The BMW is registered to an LLC. Your investment accounts predate the marriage and are also held in trust. Is this accurate? I took a slow sip of my coffee. It is. I see. And the joint accounts? There are no joint accounts, Mr. Rodriguez. My wife had access to my personal checking account for household expenses via a debit card I gave her, but there were never any joint accounts established. Through the phone, I could hear Talia shouting something in the background. It was muffled, but the words "this can't be legal" and "he's hiding assets" came through loud and clear. Mr. Whitlock, Rodriguez said, now clearly under pressure, my client is quite upset. She feels that you may have deliberately concealed the true nature of your holdings. I leaned back in my chair and glanced out the window. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm curious. Did your client tell you that I established the trust structure in 2017, 3 years before we even met? Silence. Did she mention that all of this information was available in public records? That she could have researched the property ownership at any point during our marriage? More silence. The trust documents are filed with Jefferson County. The LLC registration is with the Colorado Secretary of State. Everything is completely transparent and legal. And that's when I heard it. The sudden shuffle, the tone shift, the snap of impatience. Talia grabbed the phone. Graham, this is bullshit and you know it, Talia said, her voice cracking over the phone. You can't just hide everything in some trust. I leaned back in my chair, my tone calm but firm. I didn't hide anything, Talia. I protected my assets using standard legal instruments that existed 3 years before I knew you. Your attorney can explain the difference. But we're married, she shot back. I'm entitled to half. You're entitled to half of the marital assets. I clarified, slowly, deliberately. The trust assets aren't marital property because they weren't acquired during the marriage. They were acquired years before I ever met you. The line went dead. I didn't call her back. An hour later, Robert, my attorney, called. He was chuckling. Rodriguez just requested a meeting, he said. Let me guess, I replied. They want to discuss a reasonable settlement? Exactly. You want to hear what's reasonable to them? Lay it on me. They're asking for the Mercedes and $50,000 in cash, plus temporary alimony of $3,000 a month. I didn't hesitate. Counteroffer. We'll consider letting her keep the clothes she took. Meanwhile, I had been quietly documenting everything. Logan Reeve had made it easy for me. His Instagram was a gold mine. Photos of him and Talia at restaurants during what should have been work hours. Pictures from weekend trips to Aspen and Boulder. There were even selfies taken in what was clearly my house while I was out of town on business. I studied the metadata on the photos. They dated back to October 2023, 5 months before Talia had asked for the divorce. Then there was Logan himself. Through Jameson's friend, who worked in the same building as Talia's marketing firm, I found out Logan had been laid off from 2 previous jobs for performance issues. His current position was already on shaky ground. Apparently, he had a reputation for office relationships and cutting corners on client work. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in downtown Denver. I wore my best suit, the charcoal Tom Ford I had bought for client meetings. Talia showed up in the dress I bought her for our 2nd anniversary. It used to be one of her favorites, deep blue, soft fabric that hugged her just right. Now it looked slightly worn, the hem a bit frayed. The irony wasn't lost on me. That dress had once symbolized a happy milestone. Now it marked the beginning of a legal battle. We sat in the courtroom, the hum of tension settling over everything like a heavy fog. Judge Patricia Hendris, stern, no-nonsense, with a reputation for cutting through legal fluff like a scalpel, was flipping through the case file. I knew of her, and I knew this wouldn't be drawn out. That was fine by me. She finally looked up. Mr. Rodriguez, she said, fixing her sharp gaze on Talia's lawyer, I've reviewed your client's petition. She's requesting equitable distribution of marital assets, temporary spousal support, and attorney's fees. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Rodriguez replied. She turned to my attorney. And Mr. Mitchell, your client disputes these claims? Mitchell nodded. We do, Your Honor. We contend that there are virtually no marital assets to distribute. Judge Hendris shifted her attention to Talia. Mrs. Whitlock, were you aware of your husband's trust and LLC structure when you married? Talia hesitated. I watched her shift in her seat, uncomfortable. No, Your Honor. I mean, not really, she said. Not really, Hendris repeated. You knew he was successful, but you didn't know about all the legal arrangements. Talia gave a small nod. Yes, that's right. I see. And during your 4-year marriage, did you contribute financially to the acquisition or improvement of any of these assets? I paid for groceries sometimes, she said, with the debit card he gave me, and I helped with decorating the house. But you didn't contribute to the mortgage payments, which are paid by the trust? No, Your Honor. Or to the vehicle payments made by the LLC? No. Judge Hendris made some notes in front of her. I glanced at Mitchell, who remained stone-faced. Mr. Rodriguez, the judge continued, do you have any evidence that your client made substantial financial contributions to the acquisition or improvement of the trust assets? Rodriguez looked flustered as he shuffled through his papers. We believe that Mrs. Whitlock's domestic contributions during the marriage should be considered. Mr. Rodriguez, she said flatly, domestic contributions don't transform separate property established years before marriage into marital property. You should know this. The hearing lasted 23 minutes. Judge Hendris was efficient and precise, exactly as I'd expected. 2 days later, she issued her preliminary ruling. No spousal support, no equitable distribution of trust assets, no attorney's fees. I sat across from Robert at the Brown Palace Hotel, our plates half finished, silverware resting on crisp white napkins. He dabbed at his mouth and leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to keep things discreet. Talia would be allowed to keep her personal belongings, he said, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And that's it. The final hearing is 6 weeks out, but it's a formality at this point. I swirled the ice in my water glass, watching it clink softly. You really think she won't push back? Robert smirked. She can appeal, sure, but she has no grounds. Colorado law is very clear on separate property versus marital property. especially when the assets predate the marriage by years. She'd be wasting her money. I nodded, letting that sink in. What about Rodriguez? He chuckled and leaned back in his chair. Rodriguez is already backpedaling. He's telling people this was a complex asset protection case that was impossible to predict. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds like damage control. It is. Translation? Robert said, signaling the waiter for the check. He didn't do his homework. And now he's embarrassed. Justice, I thought. Not the kind delivered in courtrooms. Just the quiet kind that unfolds when people underestimate the consequences of their own actions. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, I was in my home office when Jameson called. I put the call on speaker and leaned back in my chair. You remember Logan Reeve? He asked, without preamble. Talia's boyfriend. I replied, keeping my tone even. Yeah, he got fired yesterday. I sat up a little straighter. Seriously. Apparently his last 3 client campaigns were disasters. Lost the agency nearly $200,000 in billing. I let out a low whistle. Any idea why? Word is, he's been distracted lately. Relationship drama. Financial stress. Supporting 2 people on a marketing associate salary. His supervisor said he's been making careless mistakes, missing deadlines. I didn't say anything for a moment. I didn't need to. Jameson filled the silence. I mean, the guy went from single life to paying rent and bills for himself and Talia. You do the math. I could do the math. Logan had walked into that situation blind, charmed by whatever performance she had given him. But real life doesn't run on chemistry. It runs on bank accounts and accountability. The following week, I stopped at the Starbucks near my house. I just sat down with my coffee when my phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Graham, we need to talk. This is Talia. I stared at it for a moment, expressionless, then hit delete. An hour later, another one. Graham, please. I made a mistake. Can we work this out? Delete. That evening, another. I know you're getting these messages. Logan lost his job. I can't afford my share of the apartment rent. Please call me. I poured myself a whiskey and settled into the couch. The Broncos game was on, but I barely watched. The texts kept coming. For 3 days, they kept coming. Each one more desperate than the last. I'll drop the divorce. We can try counseling. I never loved him. I'll sign a postnup. That's what she said to me, sitting across from me in the lawyer's office, her voice low. Her eyes darted toward mine, then away, as if searching for the right combination of guilt and desperation that might sway me. But I didn't respond. I just nodded, cold and mechanical, and left the room. On Thursday, she showed up at my house. I watched through the front window as she got out of an Uber. No more access to the Mercedes. That privilege was gone. She looked different, tired, older. Her hair was a shade too brassy, like she'd colored it herself with a drugstore box. The sleek, expensive cut was gone, replaced by a blunt, uneven trim. Her designer clothes had vanished, replaced by a cheap jacket and wrinkled jeans that looked like they came from a clearance bin. She walked up the path and rang the doorbell. I stood behind the curtain, watching. I didn't move. She rang again. Then she knocked. Graham, are you in there? Her voice was muffled but unmistakable. I turned up the television. Please, she called through the door. Can we talk? I walked to the kitchen and made a sandwich. Turkey and Swiss. Calm, deliberate movements. I could still hear her outside, pacing. Another knock. Graham, I messed up, but I want to make things right. I sat at the counter and took a bite. Finally, I heard the soft shuffle of her footsteps retreating down the driveway. I didn't look. The final divorce hearing was held on a cold Tuesday in November 2024. The sky was gray, and the wind sharp enough to sting your cheeks. I arrived early, dressed in a charcoal suit and black coat, parked my BMW 2 blocks away, and walked the rest of the distance to the Jefferson County Courthouse. Talia showed up just before the hearing began, with a different attorney. A young public defender, mid-20s, maybe, carrying a folder and nothing else. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. No smile, no handshake, no effort to pretend she believed in her client's case. Rodriguez had dropped Talia, citing inability to pay his legal fees. The courtroom was mostly empty, just us and the judge. Judge Hendricks handled it like a routine traffic violation. Dissolution of marriage. No alimony. No division of assets. Each party assumes responsibility for their own legal expenses, she said, tapping his pen once on the bench. Case closed. And just like that, it was over. As I stepped out into the cold, I felt the wind bite into my skin, but I didn't mind. I was free. I walked toward the parking lot. Graham, wait. I didn't stop. Graham, please. Her voice cracked. I'm living in a studio apartment in Aurora. I'm working at a call center. I can barely afford groceries. I reached my car and opened the door. She ran up and knocked on the window. I looked at her, really looked at her. I know I screwed up, she said through the glass. I know I hurt you. But we had 4 good years. Doesn't that count for something? I started the engine. She stood there, eyes brimming, lips trembling. For a moment, just a breath, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the calculation in her eyes the night I told her I'd lost my position. I remembered how quickly she moved in with Logan. I remembered how she assumed she was entitled to half of everything I had built. I drove away. 6 months later, Jameson told me he'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Talia and Logan had broken up. Apparently, the stress of Talia's unemployment and our financial problems had destroyed what was left of our relationship. She was working 2 part-time jobs, answering calls at a center during the day and waiting tables at a mid-tier Italian place at night. She'd moved out, was living with a roommate she found on Craigslist. Meanwhile, I had taken my forced break from the daily grind of running my company and turned it into something productive. I started consulting for other transportation firms. The work was flexible, lucrative, and oddly freeing. I got to step into other systems, fix things, offer perspective, and then walk away. It was problem-solving without the constant managerial weight. And to my surprise, I liked it. I also started dating again. Slowly, cautiously. I had legal protections in place this time. Ironclad prenup templates, clear boundaries, transparency. It wasn't just paranoia. It was preparation. And I found myself optimistic again, in a quiet, mature kind of way. As for Logan Reeve, last I heard, he was selling insurance in Kansas City. Turns out Denver's marketing world has a long memory when it comes to flaming out with high-paying clients. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. Talia tried to reach out. First a few texts. I just want to talk. You're being cold, Graham. I made a mistake. Can we just talk? Then came the emails. Paragraphs and paragraphs of revisionist history. She wrote about how she was lost, confused, under pressure. That what happened wasn't black and white. That she missed me. That she wanted to explain. I didn't reply. Even the handwritten letter that showed up, on what would have been our 5th anniversary, I didn't open it. Just recognized her looping script and dropped it in the drawer with the rest. There was nothing left to say. Silence, I'd learned, was the most powerful response of all. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, if I feel bad about where she ended up. The answer is no. I didn't destroy Talia's life. Her choices did that. I didn't force her to cheat. I didn't tell her to lie to my face or try to go after assets she didn't help earn. I just protected myself, with tools I had in place long before she ever walked into my life. My father used to tell me, hope for the best, Graham, but plan for the worst. That's not cynicism. That's just smart. He was right. In business and in life, preparation isn't paranoia. It's wisdom. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just letting people face the natural consequences of their own actions while you move forward with your life intact. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.